Thanks for clicking. My name is Mark Mitchell. I'm a mortgage broker here in London, Ontario. Evergrande, a Chinese real estate developer, has been in the breaking news the past few days and weeks as it looks like the company might be going bankrupt. The real estate investment company is the second largest development company in China, and many are starting to call it a second Lehman Brothers, or China's Lehman Brothers, which very well could cause the next global financial crisis.
It's already being described as a Chinese Lehman Brothers crisis for the fourth day in a row.
The company's nearly $300 billion in debt, which is one of the most indebted companies in the entire world, so obviously its bankruptcy would send shockwaves throughout not only China, but throughout the world as well. Investors, or people who have bought real estate from Evergrande, are starting to react the way you would expect them to react if you put a huge down payment on a home, and we're told the company that's supposed to be building that home might be going bankrupt.
我们把我们家所有的财产给两套房都卖了，说在你们恒大买房，你们恒大是5块钱。
Those and 1.5 million Chinese like them are obviously freaking out right now over the aspect of not being able to get their home, something that Chinese citizens invest in very, very heavily, even more than their North American counterparts. China doesn't really have a stock market in the same manner that the West does. So if you want to guarantee your returns, you invest in your home. Similar to Lehman Brothers in 2008, which is widely held to be really the start of the global financial crisis when they were allowed to fail, when they were allowed to go bankrupt. Many are saying that this could very well not be contained just in China and could spread out throughout the world. So as anyone does when they look at a catastrophe in the making, in progress, we have to think, how does this affect us? It's not great, but it's what people think. So what I want to do is look at the Evergrande in China and see exactly how, through which mechanisms, could this crisis affect Canadian real estate. If this is going to be the next Lehman Brothers, then it's a good idea to be ahead of the game to kind of understand what is going on and how it's affecting us. So I want to briefly go over what is Evergrande, why it's potentially going bankrupt, how could it affect Canadian real estate, and what to look for next. On a side note, the election is being held today. I'm told that we're probably not going to have a real clear-cut winner tonight, but we could in the next few days. Any real estate news that comes out, we'll have it updates on this channel. Please click like and subscribe to get those updates. But for now, let's get into Evergrande. So Evergrande is the second largest real estate developer in China. It has 1,300 projects underway in over 280 cities. And as mentioned, it's over $300 billion in debt. Chinese authorities have been keeping a close eye on this debt, and last year started cracking down on how much developers can borrow. As mentioned, with $300 billion in debt, obviously it's caught the eye of Chinese authorities. So it started off $300 billion in debt. Chinese authorities cracked down on how much debt that they can take on. And this is where the problem really starts to come to fruition. As the company has hundreds of projects still underway, still yet to be completed, as we saw with the protests, they needed, since they couldn't borrow any more money, they needed funding to be able to finish these construction projects. While they did have a whole lot of real estate assets that they had purchased from the Chinese state, they turned to those assets as a means to raise funding to complete already underway projects. So as they start to flood the market with their real estate holdings, that starts to spook investors a little bit, and the price of those real estate holdings starts to shrink down, starts to go lower as anytime anything is flooded in the market. As a result, anybody that were going to buy those real estate holdings thought, well, maybe let's just wait a little bit. Let's wait this out. Maybe they can go even lower and lower. Not really what you want to happen when you're trying to raise funding because you can't borrow any more money. Not only do they need the money to complete their existing projects, but they have a lot of interest payments to make. Evergrande owes money to about 171 domestic banks and 121 other financial firms. If it defaults, this is going to lead to a large credit crunch. Obviously, much more money than either you or I would ever want to owe to way more banks than we would ever want to owe it to. Nonetheless, so they owe all of this money to the banks, to other credit firms, and they have to complete their projects. They've started missing interest payments. In fact, recently they started even offering up parking spots as a means of payment, which should give you a good idea of how bad it actually is over in for Evergrande right now. Now, when a company as big as Evergrande stops making their payments to the banks, this could create a real credit crunch, and it could also start to create a spotlight on all the other real estate developers. Is this starting to sound familiar like it did with Lehman Brothers and mortgage-backed securities? There's good reason for that, and that's why the comparisons are being made. So with the banks not getting their payments, the bonds coming due, and Evergrande not being able to complete its projects, it's looking at a very real possibility of bankruptcy. And that leads us to how this could hit Canada. If, and this is a big if, there's nothing saying that this is set in stone, or that things can't be done to fix it. In fact, we are going to get to that. This is just to say that if this Evergrande is allowed to fail, if the 170 so-odd domestic banks in China and 120 other lenders in China don't get their money from Evergrande, this could very well spread beyond Chinese borders, much in the same way that Lehman Brothers at the start in 2008 did spread throughout the globe. We've all heard from politicians, from investors, from real estate agents, from mortgage brokers, from home buyers, that the Chinese citizens have made a lot of money investing into Canada's real estate. In 2015, I think it was, Chinese purchases accounted for nearly 1/3 of all purchases in the Vancouver area. In the past few years, foreign buyers' taxes have been imposed on Toronto and Vancouver to curb foreign, and as we mentioned on this channel, that means China, investment into Canada. Our leaders throughout the campaign are talking about a 2-year ban on the purchase of Canadian real estate by foreign buyers. So obviously, while we don't have the exact numbers of the amount of Chinese investment into real estate in Canada, we know it's huge. We just do. There's signs everywhere for it. Given that China is so heavily invested into Canada, if their market goes badly, if a lot of loans start to be called in China, as their economy is going to have a real problem as well, not just real estate, which composes a huge part of their economy, but if their economy in itself goes poorly, people in China, Chinese citizens, are going to need cash. They're going to need to liquidate. One place that they could look to get that liquid, to get their money, is their vast real estate holdings in Canada. If this sounds even more familiar, it should. What they will do is start dumping their real estate holdings in Canada, which would flood our market with supply. Now, if you're an average home buyer, you're thinking, excellent, perfect, it's about time. We need a price drop after this crazy market, right? Not so much. Obviously, yes, we could use a slowing of our real estate, definitely. But a huge crash is not what we want. If the market's flooded, prices could plummet. And if prices could plummet, then we have a bank problem. Much in the same way that there's a bank problem in China unfolding right now with Evergrande. And thereby we see their crisis spreading to Canada. My prediction, I think China, either directly or by working with the banks, are going to bail out Evergrande. And here's the reason. And the reason for this rests solely, almost entirely, on the legitimacy of the regime. In Canada and the United States and most of the West, the legitimacy of our regime stems from our elections. We vote people in and out. Yes, I know we obviously have some democratic problems, Tripoli, Senate, first past the post, etc., 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 but we can change our leaders. Again, obviously there's some argument as to how much that's effective, but we can change our leaders. We do have that option every 4 years, or 5 years, or every couple months, depending, apparently. But we do have that option. In China, their legitimacy, the legitimacy of the regime, of the Chinese Communist Party, rests on for how long they can deliver the goods. The economic development that China's enjoyed over the past 20, 30 years, almost 10% growth per year, unheard of here in Canada. The regime needs to keep that money flowing. It has to, or the regime, the very existence of the regime, could be at stake. And as with any regime, any person, they concentrate first on survival, and everything else comes thereafter. Given the major economic problems that China could succumb to, both with their real estate, their bank, their construction workers, their everything in China that could experience a huge slowdown, especially right after COVID, I don't think the regime is going to risk that that's going to happen. And remember, $300 billion, that's a huge amount for a corporation. It's not a whole lot. I mean, it's not tiny, but it's not a whole lot for the Chinese state, who's rich with foreign reserves. I think they have $2 trillion, something like that, in US dollars on hand. So they're not exactly hurting that they can't afford to bail them out. So I think the regime isn't going to risk massive economic decline in China. So I do think that they will bail them out. China has signaled that they don't want to bail them out and don't expect them to, but one way or another, I don't see that the bankruptcy will be forthcoming in any of the ways that in much in the same way that Lehman Brothers happened. With that said, if I could predict the future 100% of the time, I wouldn't be on YouTube or being a mortgage broker. Well, that's not true. I like my job. I'd be on YouTube and a mortgage broker with a much bigger house. But if we do start to see that Evergrande is starting to fall, and it does look like they're going to let them go bankrupt, the Chinese party, the Communist Party, is not a perfectly rational actor, and they make mistakes as well. So obviously they let this crisis ferment. Maybe they're not thinking correctly as well. So if it does happen, watch for Canadian real estate to start to be flooded with cheap properties. That'll be a good sign that there's even more problems in China, and we could be in for a big problem. But if it does happen, and as more updates on this comes out, we'll have videos out. Click like and subscribe if you want those videos, and thanks for watching.